Fresh start. Welcome, everybody. This is our monthly PPD webinar. Actually, it's our bi-weekly webinar. We kind of put it on, we shelved it for a week because we want to try to do something that's a little bit more specific to the community. So instead of every other week, possibly, most likely being a webinar, what we're going to do is the first week of every month is going to be a webinar that is dedicated directly to new people. We're going to begin this process of helping people who are brand new to the RGB lighting hobby, people who have been intrigued as to being able to do what we've been doing. Some of us have been doing for a few years, and the process has changed. It feels like it's easier than ever, but at the moment that you say that it's easier than it ever used to be, other things happen that that make it much harder than what it is. So but the goal is to build this progressive ability to pick up the basic knowledge, the basic information to get your show running. And each month, the first week of the month is dedicated to just some of these basics without having to go deep diving into a bunch of information, just to kind of wrap your head around doing the RGB lighting hobby. And we'll build on that from there so that folks who are new can jump in, ease into the hobby, follow along, get things moving along with them, and they can be successful in getting their show running and so forth. So without any further ado, we're here to introduce the RGB lighting hobby now, but I want to start with, for the people who are watching, who will be watching after this is posted, I want people to realize that the hobby is easy, but it's hard. It's fun and it's challenging. It's stressful and it's annoying. And it's easy, but it's not easy. And getting into the hobby has a different meaning for the people that are in this room. And so one of the things that I want to ask you all is, why are you here? And it's a really important question to ask yourself. When I started with the hobby, how I started with it, why I started with it, it wasn't because I loved Christmas lighting, or I thought that I was going to be great at it, or that I would go over the top and do amazing things with it. It was quite the contrary. It was the fact that I saw a video and I thought, oh my God, if somebody else could do that, I think I could do it, and I think I can do it better than they could. And it was kind of honestly, it was kind of an ego trip. It was kind of an ego thing. I don't want to say a trip, but an ego thing. It was something I had to prove to myself. And for you, it might be the same thing. All of the homes that you see listed here in front of you are people that have been in our group. Maybe they're new to our group. Maybe they've been in the group for a year, and they all have their own reason. And we've talked about this previously, is everybody has their own story. So while you all are sitting in chat, I want you to kind of tell me exactly what it was that got you, and then we'll go through. I'll go ahead and read through them. But I want you to share with me why you're doing this hobby. And if you're new, these are things that I want you to ask yourself. Why are you doing this? Why do you want to put yourself through the challenges, the struggle, the strife? Because doing this, the hobby, is not hard. I mean, all it is just hang a decoration on your house and plug it in, right? It can't be that hard. Well, there's got to be a reason that propels you to move forward. So if you are sitting comfortably, write in the comments, give me some basic shorthand form of, this is why I wanted to do this. My kids, my family, my this, my that. I was challenged. This is something that I wanted to do forever. I saw it on TV. There's a certain hobbyist that inspired me to do it. Whatever that may be, please share that in the chat. So I'm going to start out tonight. I was going to, I had a whole bullet list of things, and unfortunately I didn't finish filling it out. But what I wanted to share with you is as you're getting started in the hobby, probably the most important thing that you can do is sit down and design what it is that you want in your show. Everybody's idea of a light show is the same, but it's different. You have elements that are very familiar from across from one layout to another, from one person's house to another, but there's also your personal touch that you put on it. It's the items that you want to put in your show, and there's reasons behind that. And I specifically pulled this photo from our Pixel Pro University Facebook group out because this is from one of our beloved members, Sherry, who her first year out of the gates, and she has at the top of her mega tree there, she has her own personally designed Abby's cross. And that is on top of the mega tree. That is what sets her show completely different. How many other shows do you see that have butterflies in them that are set up in a manner that are set up the way hers is? And so I wanted to point out Sherry's because there's a lot of people who join this hobby that have no skill, and they have to learn how to do this. So the thing I want you to, the things that I would like you to get out of today's lesson would be, start with a goal in mind. What is it that you'd like to see in your show? And you really should have not just what I want to do, it's what I want to do for the next 1, 2, and 3 years. Because I guarantee you, what you think you can do in 1 year, don't try it. It's way too much. But if you make an ultimate idea of what your show would be like in, let's say, 3 years, and you plan on it, then your goal is much more achievable, and it's going to be far less stressful. So I would also say that the next thing is we want to start with the basics. Whenever you're building your show for the first time, I want you to consider that since you're new to this, and there's so much that you can get into, meaning the hobby's so wide and broad that for you to be able to take the time to pick up just the nuances of, this is how I have to build a prop, this is how I have to hang the prop, this is how I have to do things. That you can build your show steadily based on the fact that you have a plan in place that you can work towards. This has probably been the most important piece of advice that anybody should be able to hear. And the reason why we really want to build our show steadily, we want to begin with a goal in mind or a plan in mind, and you want to do it for over a 3-year period. You want to start with the main things. What main things do you want to start with? Well, usually people want to start with a roof outline, some icicles, they want a big mega tree, or they want a giant matrix, they want some mini trees, and they want to see lights around their windows. That's a great goal for your first year. But the thing is you can't keep piling on because it's a lot of work. This stuff doesn't automatically do this work itself, and there's a lot built into it, and that's what I'm going to walk through tonight. So one of the big considerations that I want you to think about, that you're probably going to sit there and very much so underestimate, is the cost of running this show. And I could not possibly make an exhaustive list of all the things that your show needs and how much it's going to cost you. It's impossible to do that. It really is. And the reason it's impossible, because everybody's house is completely different. It might be very close, very similar, maybe somewhat the same, but the difference between your house and somebody else's house can vary greatly. So how you have to adapt to do something is different than how I might have to do it. And that was a lesson I learned this year after I started decorating my new to me house after I moved in. I got out there and I started putting stuff up. Oh, this is easy. And then Mother Nature come, blowing the house down. And I learned a couple lessons. Oh, well, that's not going to work anymore. I'm going to have to do something different. So there's, for everybody's show, it's going to cost differently because you have different challenges for your different regions, different areas, different house setup, and so forth. And so some of the general costs, though, are going to be things like pixel controllers, pixel extension cords, because you've got to have a controller that runs out in the yard, that you're going to run extension cords out from your individual props that run back to that controller. You're going to need pigtail connectors to build your controllers with. The controllers may not come built for you. You may have to DIY or do a lot of your own building because the cost of buying a controller that is complete, well, unfortunately, it costs money to pay somebody to build your controllers for you. So many people enjoy building them. I enjoy building my own controllers a lot. So there's also other things like power extension cords. If you have 3 or 4 controllers, you're going to need extension cords. Maybe you have enough to get you through the season, but over time you'll probably end up buying more extension cords just to get things out into the yard that need to have power on them. You have zip ties. Yeah, I think last season I went through probably 3,000 zip ties. And that was a shock because I had never sat there and counted them before. And that's not even half of what was already used in previous years. So there's continued cost. Yeah, I know zip ties are what, $10 for 1,000, or I don't know. Whatever they are, $10, $15, 1,000. You're still going to spend this money continuously every year because, well, you're going to misplace it. You're going to forget where you put it. You're going to need things such as EMT, PVC, rebar, stuff to mount your props with. They don't just stand up on their own. When you buy a prop, and we'll get into those later, you're buying a piece of prop, and then you're going to add to it. You're going to add pixels into it, or lights, or however you're going to light that up. And then you have to make sure that it hangs, or it stays in place, or it doesn't blow over. So there's all kinds of costs. Another one that's rather important: the hardware and guy wires. Like when you build a mega tree. Depending on how you build it and what you buy for it, some mega tree kits, the really, really good ones, the ones that you don't have to worry about, cost in the neighborhood of $800 to $1,000 to buy everything that you need for them. $1,000, and then that's not even touching the pixels or the controllers or the strips for them. So, just in general, there's a lot of things that you need. So you need a player, a show player, or a computer, a spare computer that you can control and run the show. And then of course there's the pixels and the props. And when you add all of that together at the end of the season, whenever you sit there and you take your hands up if you're a math nerd and you keep a spreadsheet of every single expense that you ever put in to the entire hobby. And what I want you to do is I want you to go back and I want you to take your total purchases, complete total purchases, and divide that by the number of pixels in your show. And usually the price comes out from somewhere between $1 and $1.10 or $1.20. It's not, if you think about it and you put a 10,000 pixel show out there, some people are going to say, oh no, you can get away with, you're not going to spend $10,000 on a Christmas light show. Oh yes, you can. Hands up in the participant window if you want to share that you spent way more on this holiday lighting hobby than you ever imagined that it was going to be, just because it becomes, number one, it's addictive. Number two, you see something that somebody does and you're like, oh, I've got to go do that. But the price of everything, especially now in this economy that we're in, we are not looking at the cheapest prices ever. I mean, some of those cheapest days, I would say 2018, 2019, we had 16-cent pixels. I'm sure you can get them really cheap, but remember the quality that you're getting for that price. So just a rule of thumb, $1 a pixel. I know 10,000 pixels, $10,000, it can add up. It can. Do people actually spend that? Yes, some people do. Some people spend more. Some people don't spend that much. So keep this in mind whenever you're getting into the hobby, this is why I start with this. So another thing I'm going to mention that's not on the list here, the last thing I'll mention on the show costs, is the cost of buying something that you never end up using. Things that will end up in, well, I want to thank Carl for this, the Island of Misfit Koro props. It's something that happens, like you think, oh, I'm going to put this in my show. You get it, and you end up putting it on the shelf, forgetting about it, or you come up with a different idea, and 3 years later you look and you say, man, I still have this thing sitting here. It's going to happen to you. You're going to buy pixels and you're not going to use them because you found a different set of pixels, because the new Evos are better and you like those better. So you never know what you're going to get into until you jump in. So this is why, number one, you make a plan, like I said on the last slide. So let's get into the basics of how do you make the show run. Well, the show has to run in configuration with a computer. We already said that. It has to run in configuration alongside with a player of some sort. So software has to be used here to help us get data out to these items that are in your show, or the things that you want to put into your show. And so we use software. There's a bunch of different softwares that you can use. There's Lightorama. That's where I started, probably 16 years ago plus. There's Vixen, and these were the two that I was more familiar with whenever I started. Now, then there's xLights, which is one of the more familiar, more well-known softwares, and then there's Madrix. Madrix is a commercial software that was everybody, whenever I was beginning with pixels, everybody was very interested in trying to figure out how they could use that in combination with Lightorama and xLights, but it's more of a professional software, and it works a little differently than what we're used to. So for the sake of argument, for the sake of the presentation, we're going to focus only on xLights in this class duration. So if you are looking for more information on the other software, pretty much the hobby has kind of moved a lot more closer towards xLights. So let's go ahead and continue with how we make the show run. So first of all, once we've decided on the software that we're going to use, what we'll end up doing next is we'll have to configure the software in order to work with the items that we have. And what that means is we have to do some configuration with controllers and networking, which we'll get more into. We'll need to get into the configuration of props. We'll need to get into connecting the controllers along with the network, along with the props. And then we'll have to get into programming those props in the sequencer. And then we'll have to continue with outputting the data from the sequence out to the controllers and having the props all configured correctly. This is how the show runs. It's very basic. Whenever you sit there and say there's basically 5 things there on the sheet there that we can go through, and this is basically how you get a show to run. You connect your controllers to your network. You configure the props inside the controller. You connect the controllers to the computer program. You program the props in your software, and then you output the data to the controllers and you let it run. You let it do its thing, and it is easy. But it's hard because it's a lot of work. So what we'll do next is we'll go into the basics of just networking. So if you're familiar with networking, then networking is rather simple for you. But if you're like me, who 15 years ago, I was lucky that I ever plugged a network cable in to do more than just connect my computer to the modem that I picked up, or to wherever I was getting my internet from. So what I want you to remember is there's just some very basic things. If you're like me, there's only some basic things that you need in order to make a network connection. And a basic connection from your computer, from your network, with a network cable out to what we call a network switch. This is the basic way to get your show to run. We send data via Cat5 network cables, which are relatively inexpensive. You can make those on your own. People like to make their own network cables. Probably 60% of the people out there will go and buy network cable. This was as per our one of our polls in the PPU Facebook group from previously last year, I want to say earlier last year. 60% of the people will make their own cables. 40% of the people will just buy them. I just buy them. I don't have time to make them anymore because I'm not going to make them. I'll buy them. But they don't go bad after 1 year. They usually last for a number of years. So I just buy them and replace them if I need them. But in any event, sometimes you might want to send your data out via Wi-Fi. We don't recommend this. Wi-Fi is not reliable with E131 data. E131 is a basic name for how the computer communicates with the controllers and how it sends the data, or the kind of data path that it takes. So we don't generally use Wi-Fi, we use data cables. But that doesn't mean that Wi-Fi isn't a part of it, because there are certain circumstances where your controllers may receive Wi-Fi sync packets, and that is rather reliable, and that'll be a discussion for another day. So in general, you're going to have an extension cord going to all of your controllers, so consider that each extension cord, you'll also need a network cord to go with it. Network switches are used to connect multiple controllers together, and what a network switch does, it's kind of like a I don't want to call it a hub, I want to call it it's kind of like a three-prong extension cord, or in this case, as you see on the screen, you can see there's a 4 or 5 outputs there. One's an input and the other 4 are outputs on that little Cisco switch. And basically what that means is you can send data from the computer out to that switch and plug that switch in. And now that gives you 4 more opportunities to plug 4 different controllers into this switch and send data out. So you can have a larger switch. Some switches are 8 outputs, some are 32, some are 16 outputs. But really, what's important is that if you have one of these, that you have the ability to connect to all of your controllers. I don't have we can get more into this whenever we go into the deep dive into networks. But basically, you're going from your computer, and you can see I have this little kind of arrow graph here. It says go from your computer out to your switch, from your switch out to your controller. And all your little arrows there in that diagram, those are equal to network wires, and that's the basics to doing a network connection. We'll kind of morph into the controller side of things, and controllers are connected to your network using Ethernet cables, as we said before, and they're connected and they listen for data. That's their job. They listen for packets of data, and it's kind of got covered up there by the Falcon. But controllers must be configured to work with each prop. In other words, you must tell this controller, this output number 1 here on this controller up here, we'll say, you must tell it that by all means, I have this one prop, this candy cane, I have this snowflake, and it's in this location. Please send data to that one, and that's where it goes. And you have to tell the controller, you have to program that controller, you configure that controller for that specific prop. And that's the only thing that will work correctly there. Other props will light up, but they may not work correctly because, quite frankly, that controller expects that candy cane to be there, not a snowflake, not a spinner, not a roof outline. It wants the candy cane there, so you have to put it there if that's what you configured for it to be there. So we're going to discuss a couple of the common controllers that are on the market, and it's kind of hard to do a deep dive on this, especially on such a basic class. So suffice to say that the more common things that you might see are the Falcon F16 controller. The current model is the F16 V5. That's right here in the top right of your screen. The next one down is considered an FPP controller. These use a BeagleBone black controller board. Actually, it's a daughter board, or it's kind of a main board, and it's the brains of the controller, but it connects to the underside of the controller, and it actually processes the data from which gets sent to it from the computer. And the card that's on top, or the connection that it makes to it, the two combined together create one controller. Now, the FPP controllers generally are less expensive than a full-blown controller like the Falcon F16 V5, but they do the same thing. One is more of a DIY. Thank you, Jason. He said cape. I couldn't spit out the word cape. The BeagleBone is a microcomputer processor, and the FPP controller that you see there, that card, is a cape. It sits on top of it. So in general, they do the same thing. One runs one kind of firmware or intelligence or understanding to get data to it and from it, and the other one runs it a different way. One is a little more DIY, and the other is a little bit more simplistic whenever it comes down to the simplicity of being able to plug it in and run it. So with that, those are the two, I would say, most hobbyist common ones. Newer on the scene, but definitely making a pretty big splash, is the Genius controller line from xLights. They have a Genius 16. We started using these 2 years ago. Last year, I took advantage of getting a Pro 32 controller. It seemed to run really well. It was very simple for me to get up and running. I was happy with it. Another controller that is on the market currently, and they're very low entry to jump into, to pick up, are WLED controllers. So you can see here on the top right here, or close to the right side of the screen, you see an RGB to go. This is this one specifically is a 2-port output controller. It can receive data. This one, in some instances, you can communicate with it using your cell phone. Some of the controllers don't activate using your cell phone. This one does. You can take your cell phone and connect to it and send little commands out to it. But also, it could go onto the network and receive some data, and at the same time would be able to be useful in your show if you did try to run Wi-Fi network. And also another nice thing about them is some of these WLED controllers, maybe not the RGB to go, but other versions of them by other vendors, may have a network jack on them, so you might be able to get those as well. We never know when one of those might pop up, but they have been reasonably reliable whenever they're connected to the network and running with your show. I do have a couple of those. Then we get to some of the holiday Coro controllers, the Alpha Picks, the Hinks Picks Pros, those controllers as well. They do the job. The Alpha Picks are far easier to understand how to program them. The Hinks Picks are a little bit more on the complicated side. So if you're new, we don't recommend them to start with. But as you get stronger in your understanding with the hobby, maybe you want to get them. They're reasonably inexpensive controllers, but the ease of use may not be there, and sometimes you might not have somebody to fall back on that can give you a hand with them. And then I do want to give a kind of an old school shout out to the older controllers that are a little bit familiar to the people who've been in the hobby or have been doing this for more than 10 years. We started out with xLights 16 controllers, with SAN devices, with the Joshua P2s and the P12s. And so there's some older controllers that still do the job. They may not have all of the bells and whistles that the newer ones do, but at the end of the day, they all do the same thing. They connect to pixels. They can be configured to receive data, and they can be sent commands to turn the lights on and off and have your effects go across them from your programming. So not all controller configurations are as easy as others, as I already mentioned. Controllers must be built. Sometimes they just come naturally as cards. I said this earlier. Sometimes you have to physically go and build these controllers. And if you are unfamiliar with that, then that's an additional cost that you might have to pay somebody in order to have the controller ready for you to use. I'll be honest and say, when I started the hobby years ago, I did not build my first controllers because I didn't know how to do that. And the longer I've been in the hobby, the more I came to enjoy doing the wiring and the soldering. The sand devices were a controller. You could physically solder the pieces onto the board to save yourself some money. And you could you could put them in the controller boxes, and you could add the pigtails and all of the paraphernalia that you need, all of the hardware that you would need to build those was an extra cost. But at the same time, if you did it yourself, you usually save some money. So just be aware that as you get into the hobby, sure, your first controller might be expensive, but and this kind of goes back to that $1 per pixel cost. That cost of that pixel controller is kind of built in there. So if you have your first controller built, then you have something to look at going down the road to say, oh, now this is how you build one of these. So I can figure out how to build it on my own now. I'm too nervous to do it at first, but after you see how it's done, it's not so daunting and confusing. So each controller has its pros and cons. I can't get into all of that. Some controllers control more pixels. Some controllers control less pixels. But again, the bottom line is a controller sends out data to the pixel props, and it receives data from the network. So that's the basics that you need to know about controllers. One of the most important parts of dealing with controllers is the configuration of them. And in the software that we use that's known as xLights, the xLights will help you configure it, provided you do a lot of setup work. Now, once you've configured it in the network setup or the controller tab in xLights or whatever software that you're using, you give it this understanding, you give the controller the understanding of, like I said earlier, models are assigned controller per controller output. So that candy cane, like I said, expects to be on output 1, and the spinner expects to be, let's say, on output 2. And if you mix the two up, if you plug them in incorrectly, then they'll both work, but they'll look wrong. They won't look the way that you see it working on the screen. And then obviously the network connection is used for data connection, as we mentioned earlier. Moving on, probably one of the things that most people are most interested in is getting to pixels and what pixels are, and the things in pixels that we enjoy, which is making them change colors. So what is it about pixels that we should know the basics of? And individually, they are individually addressable and individually boy, I can't even talk today. They're individually controllable via the computer and the controller, and again, they work in concert. Generally, the data will flow only in one direction. So if you have a string of pixels, you'll have a pixel number, the beginning of the string, and then you'll have the end of the string. And so whenever you plug in the pixels into the output on the controller, generally the first pixel will get data and information, and it will say, aha, I'm pixel number 1 in the string. I'm only listening for the data for me. I'm going to send the rest of the data down the line to pixel number 2 and pixel number 3 and pixel number 4 and pixel number 5. The longer the string, let's say there's 100 pixels on an output. Let's say there's 200 or 300. That data has to travel down the line. And so when we connect up those pixels, there's a start end of it, and then there's a finishing end of it. You can't hook up pixels backwards. In some instances you can. I don't want to get too far into it, but for the most part, there's a start to your string. And if you wire in the pixels in reverse, they generally don't work. There's a variety of options or types of pixels. The one that's I think is most common is the ones here in the very top of the screen there. The white ones there, or the black ones rather. Those are the bullet pixels. We kind of equate those to mini lights, and what we can do with those is they're an individual pixel. We can put them in any configuration. And as long as we tell the software, this pixel is mapped in this location, in this location, in this location, and we give it a number, we can draw or create the digital version of the model inside the software and apply effects to it, and those little bullets, those little mini lights, will respond to that communication. The same thing with the squares. The squares are, I call them flatbacks. They're relatively easy to push. They have a square backing to them, or flat, and it makes it nice to kind of get those into certain things. If you're pushing mega tree strips, we'll say they're nice for that because they have a flat back, and it really does make it easy to push the pixels. And there's been a lot of changes to them over the years, the designs and so forth. The ones there that you see in the picture there, I recommend that version where the string, the line comes out of the back end and curls around. It doesn't just sit flat with the bottom of the casing of the outside of the pixel. I like it where it's kind of tucked in behind it, not coming out the side. It saves a little bit of the chance of having water intrusion. Water usually can damage electronic components, so this is one of the best ways, one of the better designs that I like. Now you see the next thing on the list is the seed or the fairy pixels. These have just hit the scene, I would say, within the past year and a half. They really they broke out probably 2 years, we'll say 2 years ago, and last year a lot of people were kind of jumping into the seed pixels. They're really tiny. They're very. I've actually funny. I have them right here. I have them right here in front of me, and they're real tiny. They are like a fairy pixel. Very light. The string is very thin. It's not a very big material, but the idea behind these is that they're less expensive than some of the other ones. We don't know about their longevity yet, and the repairability of them might be a little bit different than what we're used to. I haven't gotten a chance to use them. I've been playing with them, but haven't really used them. So, and then finally, one thing that a lot of people have in their shows that they enjoy are floodlights. They like to flood their house, or flood a wall, or flood buildings with these lights. And these floodlights do a really good job of being able to broadcast a wide spectrum of light across a big surface. And I would say that they are very reasonably inexpensive for a large wow effect, or a glow effect, or uplighting. I put them on my house for Halloween, and I only had 4 of them. They were 10 watts, and they did a really nice job of just putting light up against, projecting a little bit of light against the house. So these are different types of pixels. There's some other really crazy styles. There's RGB strips. You see that I don't even have RGB strips listed on the screen here, and that's because nobody should ever use strips, especially if you want to cut them and form them around things, because the strips are just a pain in the neck. So my highest recommendation is don't use any strips. So I really would, unless you're going to mount them to something and never ever touch them except for hang them up and pull them down, the strips should be limited very much to specific long straight runs that are cut to fit and never going to be touched again, and sealed like from every element in the world. So we love strips, but I'm not a fan of them. We'll go ahead and move on. So once we talk about pixels, what's kind of important what do we put these pixels into? And generally, we have a bunch of different vendors, and a couple of them are affiliates of ours. We have Boscoyo Studios. You can buy these Coro props that they create. They make these on their own. They come up with ideas. They're very creative. They're artistic. They have a way of aligning the nodes and cutting them out on a piece of white Coro board. If you don't know what Coro is, imagine, this year's a presidential election season, like the Coro signs that are all over the country that vote for this candidate, that's Coro. And when you see those signs, this is the kind of material that they're talking about. This material generally will last a very long time. though every once in a while it has been known to crack or break. If you leave it out for 3 years straight, it probably is going to get a little weak. So the effects of the sun do get to it. I'm sure the people who are in Arizona and so forth, and they've left them out longer than they should have after a few years, seen that they do deteriorate. But for sure, the Coro props are probably among the most common favorite things to add. Now, I'm not going to just say Coro. These vendors sell also other material that you can push props into. So just a couple shout outs to Boscoya Studios, Gilbert Engineering, EFL Design, Charlie's Props. Somebody posted in the chat real quick. They said Holiday Decoro. There's Holiday Coro. There's a tremendous amount of talented people and vendors who do a significant amount of work in designing the props so that they work for us. Some of them do very custom work, so that's interesting as well. But we use these Coro props, but that we're not limited to Coro props. We can also decorate, as you'll see in the picture here on the next page. You can create your own props, or you can convert your props that you already have, or things that that exist because they're old props that you used to have, and you took the old lights off of them. So, for example, in this home layout, you see some spiral trees. Well, this person had some older spiral trees that they rehabilitated and fixed up and applied pixel nodes to, and they set up the props in xLights to match. And that's what we're talking about next, is getting those props that we've decided on into the software and configuring the pixels so that they will work with the programming that we're going to give to them. Pixels are formed around different props in your house. Many people are excited to put lighting around their windows, lighting on their roof outlines, their gutter lines, the dormers on their house, and the eaves and so forth. That's like the basic thing. The first thing of the year that you the first year of a new lighting hobbyist, that's your goal, is to get the bulk of your outline, the main verticals, the main peaks on your house, the main outlines, everything that is a basic outline. Whenever you do that, it's a real fun way to add dimension to your house. Now, the other thing that you have to do is the pixel pushing into the Coro. Do not discount how easy or hard that might be. There is a lot of work that goes into pushing the Coro, and it's not something that happens in 5 minutes. You have to have strong hands. You want to wear gloves. There's a lot of work that you must apply to it. There's also the mega tree strips. Now, I didn't show a picture of what mega tree strips are, but you can imagine you've seen a mega tree or a pixel tree has been displayed in the past that you've been watching. You've seen animations go over top of it. The mega tree strips are nothing more than a strip of some sort of substrate like ABS or something to that effect, or HDPE. The mega tree strips can be pushed as well. They're especially depending on who you're getting them from, or if they're the HD version, they are harder to push. There's a lot of props, like I was saying earlier. There's homemade props. You can see here on the bottom right corner, this is a wireframe of a horse and cart, and I didn't get the whole thing in the picture, but the person whose layout this belongs to, he went and he ripped off all of the AC lights, the mini lights or LEDs, whatever were on it, and he physically zip tied pixels around this older wireframe, and he created his own wireframe version of this prop, and it was an incredible prop. And he did this all on his own, but he had to make the model for it. So you have to realize that whenever you're doing this pixel configuration, that it is a map. It is a map of where the pixel is located, commensurate to the rest of the props, or the rest of the pixels in the prop, rather. And you have to create that layout and apply that into your show's layout. Models have to match exactly with the actual prop. If they don't, it will not look correct. Like I said earlier, if you plug the candy cane into the spinner output, if you swap the two, they'll do something, but they won't look the way that they should. So again, where it's easy to do this, it's also hard. It's easy to make a mistake. So a little bit more about props. As you do these props, they do need added into the software. As I said before, they need a specific placement according to the plan that you're setting out, which is why we run in and begin to put these items, these props, these models. We call them models in the software. We put these in the layout exactly where we think they're going to be, and we try to approximate the size to make sure that they fit exactly what the area that they're going to take up. If you know the sizes of the props, which all the props do have general sizes that they are, it will tell you how much you can kind of figure out by measuring out an area. One of the best ways to figure out if a prop is going to fit is to go right out and get your tape measure, grab your tape measure, I got my tape measure, and you can go out and measure the area that you're going to be hanging it in. So another thing too, and this is rather important, just because you made the snowflake and you put it up on the house and you plugged it into the right output, good job. But now you have to make sure that the orientation that prop is displayed in the layout is identical to exactly what is on your house. So if you put it upside down on your house and you plug it in, all the effects are going to run upside down or opposite or backwards of what you think they are, because there is a top side, a bottom side, a right and a left side to your prop. And it all depends on how that model was created. So you have to pay attention to that as well. So as we talk about props and prop configurations, props are assigned to a controller. So this is in the software that we're used to using, which is xLights. This is the controller setup tab, and we have to assign each of those props from the page before. Each one of these props has to have a controller assignment and as I said before, an output assignment. So this is an important step, as after you've completed getting the layout created, as you see here, when we go in and once we're ready to start plugging these in, they have to be assigned to a controller, and that's the configuration that prop needs. The configuration needs updated to the controller. The controller needs to know, hey, I'm about to put candy cane 1 on output 1. I'm about to put spinner 1 on output number 2. It has to know that. If you change the location where you're plugging something into, that requires you to do a couple things. It requires you to re-render your sequence. It requires you to re-upload because you've made a change. What you said it was doing before, now it won't do it. It'll do it a different way. And if you don't share that information with your controllers, then again, it might work, but it won't look correct. So then kind of the last thing that I want to get into is sequencing. And the sequencing side is what I have enjoyed doing for, well, now over 16 years I've been sequencing. And programming effects is basically, as you see on the screen there, it's done different ways with different software. So you can see I have Vixen, xLights, and Madrix. How we sequence in Vixen is different than how we sequence with xLights, which is how we sequence differently in Madrix. So xLights is what I sequence with. I did sequence with Lightorama, and I did utilize their software. It works differently as well. But the idea of sequencing is listening to music or placing a music track into a linear format, a time format, where the beginning or the left side of your screen is 0 timing mark to the end of the screen to the right end, which is your 2, 3, 4 minute or however long the song is. And what you'll do is you'll take the time to individually place individual effects that are set to the same tempo of the music, that are applied to different props in different ways using different colors. So you have to be quite artistic whenever you are considering sequencing. When you're placing these effects down, placing these effects will have a start time and an end time. And there's different things that you can apply to each one of the effects so that you get a different look or perceived look. And we call this synchronizing because we're synchronizing the start of the effect, or synchronizing the turning on of the effect, and then we're synchronizing when it goes off, and then we're synchronizing when one effect ends and the next begins, and there's that blended overlay where you have one thing blending into another. So before I end this up here, I want to scroll back, and I asked at the very beginning, and it's very important to me that we all have a reason for sequencing, or excuse me, we all have a reason for doing this hobby or jumping into it. What got me started? So I have my own thing that got me into the holiday lighting thing, but just from the feedback in the chat, I want to share this because it hits everybody a different way. One person here, Dale, said the lights make him happy, and he hopes that other people who see it will leave with a smile and feeling great. Sherry says it brings joy to others, and she absolutely loves the lights too. Jason said, my son went off to college a few years ago, and our first year was his last year at home. It was a great bonding time. So I don't know how many people, if you have the chance to spend with your kids and do this stuff, this is really powerful. This is really powerful to spend that time with them. Bobby said, for my father-in-law, he does it for his father-in-law. I saw that an animated light show in his area, and he loved it. He recently was diagnosed with ALS, and it was a tribute to him. So that's awesome. There's millions of different reasons, but I just want to share some of the reasons that you can find to want to go and do this amazing hobby. Like Jerome said, enjoyment for the neighborhood kids. So I could go on. I thank you guys for posting these. Like, this is, if anything, it is really meaningful to do this in the hobby. And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up, is that when we do this, we're not doing this just for ourselves. We get to do this for everybody. So it's a joy to teach this. It's a joy to have everybody in here. I know there's like 40 some people in here. Thank you all for being here. I do want to go to the last slide, which is if you have any questions, we're going to move to our Q&A format. We call this our open mic night. We don't record this, and the reason we don't record this is there are a number of people who do not like to be recorded and have things put out there on YouTube and so forth. So we're going to end the presentation with, if you are interested in learning more, join us here in our PPU Facebook group. So guys, if you're on YouTube, consider hitting the like button, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't done yet, so hit the subscribe button. If you're in the Zoom room, by all means, please join on the YouTube bandwagon with us. We just hit 3,900 subscribers on the YouTube channel. That's huge to me. This past few weeks has really been amazing and incredible. So consider hitting the sub button, and then of course consider joining the Sequence Club. So guys, thank you for joining us tonight. It has been wonderful having you. We're going to move on to our normal session and do the open mic night session. And if you have any questions, as always, leave them in the chat below, and don't be afraid to jump in to the PPD Pixel Pro University Facebook group and ask your questions there as well. Guys, have a wonderful evening from Robert and I. We will see you in the next video. Take care and goodbye for now.